Hello and welcome to tonight's Storyworks Roundtable. We are talking about endings. So how to write them, what makes a good ending, the protagonist role in your ending, and how do you know when to end that story? So what makes endings hard to write? Do you guys struggle with endings?
Not generally, because I've usually got that in mind.
Yeah. I'm the same. My ending comes first. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I usually know my climax, and as I write and the subplots are developed, then the resolution of all those threads becomes apparent. So heck, endings are easy to write. Come on, people.
Well, no, I mean, knowing what the ending is, but they're delivering it in a fashion that's satisfying to the reader, I think is a completely different thing.
Right, so that's what makes it hard. So
I tend to end my endings too soon, if that makes sense. Like, I have a proclivity for not wanting that long, drawn-out, like, epilogue style, like 30 minutes later, we're still watching the movie. Thank you, Return of the King. Ending, so I will tend to end rather quickly after the climax, and I just want to hit that note, like that kind of fun, witty note at the end, and then I end, and then I'm like, wait a second, I didn't wrap everything up, and I have to go back and remember that I can't just ta-da! It's over.
Yes, is that sense as a writer, you want to say, see what I did there? Isn't that cool? Yes. That ending, and then the reader's going, yeah, but I need to know, did they resolve that? Did they stay in the house? Did they end up moving? And what happened to Bob? Because Bob was he was hanging around. So there's sort of some of that. What we think is there. I've delivered you the massive chess piece move at the end. Ta-da, checkmate.
Right. So part of what makes a good ending is tying up all of the questions that you've raised in the reader's mind and not leaving the reader hanging and therefore dissatisfied with your ending. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd challenge the all. I'd say, but what the latter part of what you said was not leaving the reader dissatisfied. That's probably the key, isn't it? Is that the ending has to satisfy the reader.
Right. Well, and there's a difference between finishing all of those subplots and loose ends and putting a bow on their head. So you can have something be an ambiguous ending. You can have unresolved hooks that lead into the next book. Right. But the idea is that the reader feels a sense of completion with the story she's just read and is satisfied that her questions have been answered or are leading into something new and interesting for her, as opposed to the cliffhanger idea or just leaving something unaddressed. So a hook still addresses a thread through the story, but dropping it off the page, that's unsatisfying.
No, that's right. So you want to address what you kick the story off with. I mean, really, that's the essence of it. And I think what it is that as writers, perhaps what they, if you're a plotter, you definitely would know. But even I think pantsers may well know what they feel their climactic moments are going to be. But I think as a writer, I worry sometimes that I'm delivering them in a way that's either, too trite or too contrived or too obvious. Because, we all love an ending that just takes us by surprise or leaves you gut punched. Or even sad or happy or in a way still connected to that book even when you've closed the last page or gone on to something else. It's left you thinking through the day or through the week. They're rare, but they're the endings we all want to write, I think, as writers. Is that's what's going to compel the reader maybe to pick up your next book or the next one in the series. And so whilst I know what the ending is, it's delivering it in a fashion that isn't either A, too obvious, B, too silly, C, too... I mean, the list goes on. So there's my insecurities as a writer completely all there in the ending.
Right. Okay, so no clown shoes at the ending. Let's avoid those. Well, okay, one thing that came to mind while you were talking, Robert, is that at the end you want your reader to be left either anticipating something yet to come. So in the case of a series, it's that hook, that question mark that leads us into buying the second book. Or in a standalone novel or the end of a series, it's that thing that keeps us thinking throughout the day, like what is this character's life going to be like now? Or how will the character survive now that X has happened? Like whatever that emotional resonance is that we just can't quite let go.
Right.
Because I think this is the thing about. Sorry, Kathryn, I'll come back to you because I wanted to mention something you'd said before. This is as a writer, you think that your characters, they finish there, and that's a standalone.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I'm done. I'm done with those characters. I've written that now. I've done all the revisions. The end is complete. Boom. But they're going to live on in the reader's minds, and
yeah, we hope so.
Exactly. But also past that, even readers will give them lives of their own. As you say, they might imagine what they're doing after, or they might imagine what it was like to be them, or they might be caught in a completely different moment, sitting on a bus, and then suddenly remembering, oh, wasn't that so sad when X happened, or when Thomas died, it was just gut wrenching. And so I think, we forget that you're writing a story for that emotional impact. And that's what Kathryn said, you deliver the emotional impact like in A Return of the King, and then you just dilute the whole thing by just going on and on too much. And it can, the denouement has also got to be carefully balanced. So you leave enough life there, but not exhausting it completely, because otherwise the reader's just say, yeah, right, I get it, thanks.
Right. And I think the important thing, about The Return of the King, is it is a character moment, and that having the character moment at the end is so important. Like, you can't just end with them sitting on the mountain. No. You have to know what happened to the character at the end. That's kind of the whole point. Like you said, the reader is there for the character. They may love the climax and the action or whatever crazy thing happens at the climax, but they're there for the character, so that character has to have enough resolution at the end that they can imagine the next 40 years of their life or whatever. But you don't want to give them the next 40 years of their life necessarily.
That would be another 8,000 pages.
Right.
I could just imagine if Tolkien had lived. What happened to Frodo?
Right. Right.
Well, 10-book series.
I think that was his next project. He just didn't quite get to it. Yeah. I like what you were saying, Robert, about not letting the denouement drag on. And it's really finding that balance point where you've tied up your loose ends and established the hooks you need to establish without dragging out the ending. So really, narrative summary can be your friend here. So can just the emotional moment. Like, sometimes you don't even need a scene to wrap things up for the reader. You could write a tableau, show your lovers holding hands. Boom, that's it. You could do that in a paragraph or two. And we know that they're going forward together. We don't need dialogue. We don't need action. We don't even need a marriage proposal. Just let us know that right now they're happy together. Right. All right, so I was giving you guys a chance to speak and nobody jumped in. The idea of the characters living on in the reader's imagination, which is what we all hope for, it can be surprising to learn what readers actually carry forward. I go to book clubs or whatever when I can, and in A Stone's Throw, there are 3 point of view characters, and Simona's dead, and Peter takes his and Simona's baby, and then Gemma divorces Peter. And there's an epilogue that's 5 years later, and it shows Gemma where she's at after 5 years, which, is a great place. And I thought, okay, that's it. That's everything readers need to know. I've tied everything up. Really happy with it. I've had readers go, well, what about Peter? What did he do? I'm like, what? Well, he got the baby. He's a good dad. Like, you can just imagine. Yeah, right? Like, do we need more news about Peter and the baby than they have each other and they're happy going forward?
I think also, that opens up some things about unresolved. What you leave unresolved in the story can really hook readers. And just as I know we don't often talk about the business of writing because we're talking about craft, but this is one area where it can really overlap nicely. And one way to engage your readers and bring them closer to you and find those who are going to be true fans is you write a prequel or a side story or a sequel that furthers some unresolved element. I know Chris Fox has done it, for example, very deliberately, and I took his and did it very deliberately in mine as well, where I knew there was a particular scene I could write more of, but it just wasn't really that relevant to the main plot. It would have been interesting, but it would have just been filler. But it was quite a good little side story, so I turned it into a 12,000 word short story or barely novella, and make it only available to people who are interested enough that they'll hand over their email address. So sometimes those unresolved elements, you can use that creative drive that you had in you. It may spill off to another story, and that can be useful as in your writing career, not just as a thing that is left undone.
Yeah, definitely. I know at least one person has written a story about Daisy and Tom Buchanan's baby from The Great Gatsby. So there's an example of what you're talking about, where some character who really barely exists in the story, but people have been so intrigued by, Daisy and Tom and Gatsby that they want to go and imagine what it's like, I guess, to be this baby growing up with those parents and such. So yeah, the stuff we think doesn't really fit in the main story. Yeah. I mean, I felt like Peter's story was perfectly resolved, and there's not really anything more I need to say about it. But if I ever wanted to, I could certainly jump ahead in time and imagine something from his and the baby's life, or just the baby's, or whatever I wanted to, because these things do become hooks for our readers.
So I suppose to come back to endings now, what makes a good ending is sometimes it is the things that are left undone that leave us connected. So you've got to have the main story resolved. I mean, unless it's a serial and it's a deliberate cliffhanger.
Right.
You must resolve the main story, that main arc. But it's okay to have some things left unresolved, because they might be, I hesitate to say, be deliberate about them, because that's a little too contrived, but it's okay that you don't have to type, as you say, everything in neat little bows, because part of what keeps us connected to books is that wondering, what was it Fritz Perls has said, that which is most left undone is the thing that will most drive us. And so, which is why open loops in stories are so fantastic. A story in itself is that. It's an inciting incident that you expect to be closed, and that should therefore make a good ending. But don't go so hard on the closure that you leave the reader with nothing to think about.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really well said, Robert. The main plot should always be concluded and finished, because that is the action of the story with its plot arc. But then the subplots, the emotional, character-driven aspects, are great elements of any story to leave open-ended, because you don't want to leave a story wondering, did the bad guy get his, and did the hero have a heroic day at the end? That's kind of what we need to be encapsulated and contained within the novel. But the other things, the relationship pieces, are great material for leaving us wondering about the future, the life of these characters, or leading us right into that next story. It's something we can use. I mean, we don't want our fiction to feel contrived, but as we were saying before, this is art, so artifice. And we should do everything with our story deliberately, so at the end of The Murder in Skog Hall, Jess and Beckett, her boyfriend, come out of the store, and there's Tyler, her kind of first love interest in the book, rolling back into town and getting out of his truck. Well, I didn't put that there by accident. I want the reader to see this and go, uh-oh, what's going to happen in book 2 with this love triangle? Yeah, so, and it shouldn't feel contrived. It should feel fun. Like, okay, I see. Yep. I want to tune into book 2 to see what happens with these 3 characters. Yeah, so when should we end a story? And what's the protagonist's role in the ending? Why don't we do that one first? We're talking about good endings and some of the pitfalls along the way. Let's talk about the protagonist here.
Go, Kathryn. Some airtime. You're our protagonist in this episode.
I'm the protagonist. No, I think your protagonist better be front and center. Unless they're dead.
In which case there should be, every unit.
In which case the story ended a while ago. Oh, goodness, no, Kathryn, you almost made me spit out my iced tea.
Sorry. No, I think they need to be, they've driven your plot all the way through the climax, so they need to be in some fashion or another the center of the ending there. They need to finish the whole book out. They're the ones that your readers are caring about, so they're the ones that need to have that resolution at the end. And you can totally have a dead protagonist at the end. They're tragedy.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. But then you still need to have a resolution of it. So, like with Simona, I had 2 other point of view characters plus the narrative. So if you only had a single point of view character, you would have to rely on the narrator, or go into the perspective of the dead person from beyond or something like that.
I like what you said about, that they better be front and center, dead or alive, because ultimately, if you're reading a superhero story, you don't want Robin to be the savior of the story. It's got to be Batman, because that's the deal. That's how it works. And not just in genre fiction, in any fiction, the protagonist is the one who needs to solve the riddle of the story that was open, right from the very start, because otherwise we feel robbed. Right. Otherwise, it's a Deus Ex Machina, isn't it? Whether it's a supporting character or a lightning strike from God. That's not fair to the reader. You've invested 10 hours or more of your time caring about that protagonist. They better be the one who solves the story.
Right. We've talked a lot about that with active protagonists, like keeping your protagonist active. That goes all the way past the climax. Like, they don't just stop being active because you resolve the plot. Like, you have to end with them continuing to be the one ending the story. Yeah,
and it really is about that emotional investment. Like Robert was saying, we are incited to care about this one specific character. This is our vehicle through the entire journey of the story. So it is a cheat to the reader when that gets yanked away from us. It's like, well, why did I invest in this person, or where did that go? And we want our heroes to be the heroes, not the, the role reversal with the sidekick and the hero. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, they can be catalytic or even key to what the protagonist has to do. But at the end of the day, it's the protagonist who's carried the ring up to the mountain, which is why we have an issue with Samwise, because at the end of the day, he was probably the one who made that story finish. So you look at it in that respect, think, okay, there's, but then you could argue, I suppose, there are dual protagonists towards that last part, and you're invested very much in Sam because he's been a part of Frodo the whole way through.
Yeah. A good rule of thumb is to your friends, your supporting characters can win the battle with or for your hero. They can rescue your hero once or twice in a book. But at the end of the day, it's got to be the hero who wins the war. So when you get through to that climax, your hero needs to be making the choices, fully invested, in tons of danger, getting himself out of that danger. You know, it's fine to have a team supporting you, but it's got to be the hero who's got the world on his shoulders at the end of the book.
And it's their decisions. So not even just their involvement, but if somebody else decides something for them, you know, no, you need to go ahead and shoot them. So the hero then pulls out the gun and shoots them. It's still not right. They didn't make the decision. Well, you could argue, I suppose they could have said no, but you know, I think that whole, what you were saying, Kathryn, about being an active protagonist. So you can seem like the protagonist is the one driving all the action in the last scene, but they also internally, they're the ones who have to be acting on those decisions. What do you call that, Alida? Is that agency?
Agency. Yep. Yeah. Being an active protagonist is all about making the choices that get yourself into and out of danger. So
and I think that's particularly important in your final scenes. Personally, you know, I think you can, as you say, get away with a few coincidental or causative things throughout, if there are not too many of them. But at the end, that's got to be front and center.
Right. Well, and if you look at our archetypal characters, you've got the high level hero, like the FBI agent or the detective on the police force. You don't have a hero who's a traffic warden, because he's not going to have the authority to make the choices that drive a plot through to an exciting climax. He's too low on the totem pole in that hierarchy that you've established for your world, you know. And then the other archetype is the student, the Luke Skywalker or the Karate Kid, where he's got to be thrown into a situation where he's in over his head and he learns very quickly. And part of that is through the mentoring process with the master, but part of that is also just because he doesn't have a choice, you know, because trouble finds him, and then he's got to be resourceful and quick-witted and use whatever he's got to get himself out of there to live to fight another day. So you aren't going to have characters between those two. There kind of isn't a middle ground, you know?
Right.
There's a change for you, dear listener. We'd like a 180,000 word novel. It's called The Parking Ticket, and it's all about traffic wardens.
Yeah.
Better give them a conflict that they can solve.
Yes. My quota is to write 30 parking tickets today. Oh no. Look, a jaywalker. Yeah. No. And that's why if you're going to write a character who's somebody like an amateur detective, emphasis on amateur, then you've got to figure out the qualities and the skills to give that character that are going to let her get into and out of trouble without having the resources of, say, the FBI agent who's got all the training and the special skills and, you know.
Because otherwise it looks a little bit too convenient when you get to the ending, doesn't it? That,
oh, yes.
They've managed to solve this, but, you know, the most professional police forces in the same state couldn't. And so that is the thing that always, I don't read cozy mysteries and I don't know much about them, but I've always thought, gee, that must be really challenging as a writer to continually write about this, you know, old lady who owns the knitting shop and manages to somehow, you know, solve this deadly village where every episode somebody dies, but the police can't solve it. But this little old lady who runs a knitting shop, and her cat, they can always solve it. And to me, you know, as a premise, I'm being very rude here to people who love and write cozy mysteries. As a premise, that just sounds totally ridiculous, but clearly it isn't because of the popularity. You know, people, there's believability there, even with the ending. So as you say, it's that whole what you've dripped into it and led up to and alluded to that's given that particular protagonist the unique position to be in to then be able to bring that story to a head.
Right, and that's part of the fun of it, is finding that unique position for that character so that, you know, like Miss Marple knows the ins and outs of the village and has access to everyone, and nobody would ever think she's going to be a threat to, will prevent them from getting away with their nefarious deeds. So, yeah, it just comes down to plausibility and making sure you can keep your protagonist actively engaged through the climax. It's a problem when the crime is solved and the protagonist is meant to be the hero, but he didn't do anything to solve the crime. Mm-hmm.
And when we were talking about Dead or Alive as well before, that's one of the, if you want to see how that impacts on the readers, then go and read the reviews for the final book in the Divergent series. So Allegiant, I think it is. And where, spoiler alert, so for anyone who hasn't read it and still wants to, it's written in first-person present tense throughout the whole series until book 3, in which case we suddenly get another character come in with first-person present tense, which has been her romantic offsider. And then at the end of the book, the protagonist gets killed. But it's not the end. And so all of a sudden it finishes now with the second point of view character that never started the series in the first place, that wasn't the one that we'd spent 20 hours with. And whether you like the writing or not isn't the point. You spent all that time with that character and you wanted her to deliver, which in a way she did, but she got accidentally shot in the middle of it. It was just such a big letdown, and it could have been so much more spectacular. So you go read reviews and see what the emotional impact that had on readers, where they wanted her to be the hero because that's what she was the whole time. Right. And she had a heroic moment, but she died doing it.
Yeah.
It kind of didn't work.
Yeah, that's really interesting that didn't work, and it just emphasizes that point we've been making about the reader's investment in the protagonist and how important it is to play out, to pay the reader for that emotional investment through the climax, and if you're going to kill your protagonist, do it in the climax so that the reader gets that emotional thrill and payoff, and then can spend the rest of the week mourning for this hero who saved the day, instead of going, why did that writer kill her in the middle of the book? Oh, I'm so mad. I really wanted to see.
To be fair, it was close to the end and in the closing sentences. But it just, as Kathryn said, nothing wrong with your protagonist being killed at the end of a story. Well, unless it's a series that you want to continue. But, it can be a tragic, and clearly this was meant to be tragic and meant to be gut-wrenching. But like I say, it's fine to know what you want to do at the end. You say, this would be really cool if I write this Hunger Games-like series and right at the end, instead of Katniss surviving and going off and getting married and finally discovering love and having a baby, this time the protagonist is going to die. And you think, that does sound really cool, but you've got to deliver that. You've got to execute that in a way that's going to be gut-wrenching enough that that you won't hurt the reader from having spent all that time with them and just feel let down and say, that was, Right. So, I mean, it's to have an emotional impact, but you don't want a negative emotional impact where the readers just hate you for turning the story that way, because it just didn't make sense.
Definitely.
Does that lead us to bad endings?
Well, yeah, or we could talk about when to end. We just have or we can leave that for endings part 2.
No, we should talk about when to end, I think.
Okay, so let's talk about when to end. When should we end our stories? When we've seen ourselves through the climax and resolved all necessary elements of the story.
Yeah, and not after that either. I mean, it's one of those Goldilocks moments, isn't it? Not too soon and not too late. It's a tricky one to deliver, because sometimes as a writer you do want to do the whole Return of the King. Okay, I want to show how grandiose everything happened and what happened back in the Shire and blah, blah, blah. Or you're doing the Stephen King thing where you just stop. But what happened? What happened? And it's horrible. He's the worst ender, I reckon, of the big authors out there. Just hardly ever resolves them the way you'd like it to resolve. Anyway, I digress. But it's that satisfaction moment, isn't it? That you're trying to find the sort of
right. Right. Well, and we talked about.
I've eaten enough of the chocolate to enjoy it, but not so much that I feel sick.
Right. We were talking earlier about the denouement and how not to drag it out. So that really applies here. But what about when do you have the climax? When do do you ever have doubt about when in the plot comes the ending?
Yeah, sometimes.
Do you think you ever write on and not quite reach that climax when you should have already?
I'm the other way. I will probably tend to think, oh God, I'm going to deliver this at the beginning of the third act, not at 98% of the way through the story. So I tend to, but then it never happens when I actually get there and start deconstructing everything. I think in your head you think, bad guy goes down, hero triumphs. And so it is conceptually a simple moment. But actually, when you get to deliver that, it's not so simple because you're tying up loose ends, et cetera, And I think the thing that I know I have to train myself to avoid there is not delivering that last slap too early. So making sure I'm careful enough, because as a writer, you're kind of excited. Here we go. I'm getting to the bit, that bit. The reason I thought of this whole story in the first place, it's going to be brilliant. I'm Shakespeare, I tell you. And and then the excitement can lead me anyway to sort of write it too early or too quickly, so there's not enough tension. That I think it's important to stretch the rubber band as much as possible. Not necessarily an action story either. I mean, in any story with action. So I suppose you're stretching it that much until then you're ready to let it snap, and that's when, or release it, and that's when the ending should be.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I have to go in and backfill events that should have happened in order to make it more logical, or to give it more tension, or to build higher stakes, because I will plow right through that middle section, and my middle ends up being half as long as the beginning, and it's ridiculous. But I'm the same way. I would much rather just slide right into the ending, and then get that nice steady rise in tension and up to the climax.
Interesting. I'm not like that. I like to.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I like to develop everything as I go and see these pieces, coming together, the puzzle pieces taking shape and building up to the climax, so that when I get to the climax, everything is in place to support it. It's sort of like if you're building, I don't know, say a TPE structure, and you're leaning poles against each other and you need them all to stay put. So at the end, you can have that climax there. And if you don't have all the poles in place, they'll just collapse. They need to brace against each other properly in order to support the climax. So I like working on that as I go.
You're probably building one with like 8 poles, and I've got 3 tied together with a string, and I'm draping stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I'm pretty methodical that way.
I wish I was more methodical like that. It's just that thing where I just get so excited about the whole of the story that I then have to go back in and fill it out, to flesh it out, give my character more depth, give my theme a little more thought, give my rising action some more rise to it, and give that a better storyline overall.
There's also some genres where you're going to have what they call the false ending, or the decoy ending. So it hasn't quite finished yet. As a reader, you think that it's all over, but then it isn't. And I think I've mentioned I've been rereading the Dresden Files, and Jim Butcher is a master of that. I think if you want to read how endings can both drag out and yet be, oh, here's the ending. Oh no, here's the ending. Oh, that's the ending. Whoa, so he's very good at building up the tension and leading you to think that maybe that's been the ending, but it kind of hasn't been. Definitely a writer who likes to surprise.
That's when I look at my book and go, no, 30 pages left.
Exactly.
Right.
That works better in ebook and audiobook where you don't know how far to the ending.
It works against you, though, because there are people who will put previews, say a couple of chapters of the next book, or I've seen a whole raft of glossary or author acknowledgements, and there was one that ended
like 50
on
pages at the end.
It ended on 78%. Brian Cohen and I were reviewing a young adult novel, and it ended on 78%. And so we got to this climactic moment and go, wow, this is fantastic. I wonder what's going to happen yet. And then a few more pages and I was done. And I went, hang on a minute, I can't. What? And then the next part was I don't know what it was, a snippet of some extra novel or, some. So you do have to beware there, because as authors sometimes we're told, put a preview of your next book in there. But as a reader who tracks percentages, not everyone does, but some do, you might need them to believe there's more when there isn't. And so I actually took out I had chapters in my middle grade science fiction fantasy, and I took them out because of that very reason. I thought, no, I'm just going to try and make the ending more hooky and hope that they like it enough that they'll go on, as opposed to leave them with the next chapter. But anyway, that's personal preference.
Definitely.
Because with a physical book, you're unlikely to get that. You're on it, even if it's a doorstop. That's sort of the bit. That's when I look for like a Stephen King novel, when you get because they're always big, and you're reading. I hope he edits it properly. I really do, because I'm enjoying this story. Can't wait to see what happens at the end. Oh, okay. Thanks, Stephen.
So what makes a disappointing ending then?
A weak resolution of the opening plot premise.
Okay.
So
not necessarily a weak climax, but really the resolution.
Yeah. So it could be fraught with action, but if it doesn't really address the presenting, then I think you don't necessarily know why as a reader it was dissatisfying.
Right.
But it just leaves you a little hollow. You go, okay, all right, well, that was good. I kind of enjoyed that. I wish the ending more, and you don't know. You think, well, what had? If you went back and dissected it and saw what the opening conflict was, you might find out, it wasn't. Yeah. The ending wasn't really solved with any relevance to the opening conflict.
Right. That's really interesting, Robert, because I think it highlights the fact that theme and subplots are so important to us as readers and therefore as writers, because the story is about multiple things. It's about the tangible plot, but then it's also about the intangible character development and relationships. And if you don't satisfy the intangible aspects of your story, if you only satisfy the plot, building blew up, bad guy died, hero lived, right? You still leave the reader feeling hollow if we don't know, okay, the hero's alive, but did he get the girl? Was his mother released from captivity? Whatever, all of those other aspects, because that's where the emotional investment is. It's with the character and the subplots.
Right.
The thematic content.
Yes, the thematic content, exactly.
Wow.
And also, I think, I wouldn't, if I'd been, this is going to sound terrible because I'm going to criticize J.K. Rowling. I didn't like, you can edit this out.
We're equal opportunity critical on this show.
Yes, we are.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll criticize my own work as well. And I just thought that it was a bit lame, the ending of the last book, where all of a sudden, Harry's 37 or whatever it is. And I understand that I'm led to believe that she did it because she wanted to say to everybody, look, we're done with this, right? We're done. Because I think they thought that if she'd still left Harry young, even though he who shall not be named was no longer, was there still an opening for something else? And then all of a sudden we zoomed on, and I just felt a little, let down by that personally. Even though it was well written, there was nothing wrong with it. I think it was unnecessary.
I have to totally disagree with you, Robert.
Hollywood ending. Don't need that.
I disagree completely.
You liked it?
Well, it was nice. It was nice that Harry married Ginny and they had kids and the kids are going to Hogwarts. That wasn't the part that makes it necessary. the part that makes it necessary is it resolves the thematic through line of the entire series. When we meet Harry, he's an orphan, he's unloved, he's searching for family and a connection primarily to his parents. And even though the mom is important, it's really the father figure who's the through line. His dad died, Dumbledore died, Snape died, Sirius Black died. All of the male figures in his life throughout the entire series died. And so at the beginning of the book, we've got the fatherless boy. And at the end of the series, we've got the boy who becomes the father. So he's got love and family, and he is the protector. He is everything to the people he loves that he was searching for at the beginning of the book. And that's what makes this necessary. It resolves the theme, the thematic, emotional, character-driven content of the whole series. Now,
Well, I understand the advice you gave her, but maybe when you edited it, or her editor, you could have just made that bit a bit shorter, because I think you gave her very good advice there.
Mm-hmm.
She's clearly followed it.
Yeah, I mean,
logically, yes. I agree
yeah,
yes.
I mean, I agree with you that the ending felt a little pat, a little predictable. Like, yeah, okay, they're sending their kids to Hogwarts, and yeah, it's a predictable ending, but it's a happy ending. It wraps it up for the readers.
Yep.
To say. It also kind of puts a period on the series and says, don't expect me to write a book 8, because look, it's 20 years later and everyone's fine and happy. It's like what happened to Peter and the baby. Really? Do I need to tell you? You know, right. They're fine. They're happy. All right.
I'm going to get hate mail now anyway. That's okay.
No, you aren't. I know there are people who agree with you. I know there are lots of people who hated the epilogue. So, love it or hate it, it does its job of wrapping up the thematic content.
Yeah, I would say that I'm probably not a hater, so I wouldn't take myself that strongly. It seemed to me unneeded. I was looking forward to more denouement of the action that had just left me so hot. And then all of a sudden, here I am. Oh, okay, I've bounded 20 years into the future. Oh, okay, all right, that's interesting. And so, yeah, it was more like that. It was more, I suppose, if I think about it, it ties two things. One is the Hollywood ending, so as you say, a little bit too pat, maybe. And two, the dribble ending, which is where, when I used to teach presentation skills, we'd talk about somebody finishing their presentation and then say, okay, so I think that pretty much about wraps me up now. Before we end, I'd just like to ask if there's any question, and people are already getting up, you know, and so the ending is not definite. And so one of the things I think, and again, this takes me back to Stephen King examples, what he lacks is definiteness in there, I think, as well sometimes. And he's not the only one. I mean, you know, we've all done it probably in our first drafts. Is where is you know, if you said where do you end, I suppose where it's the most definite, maybe. You know, where when I say that, I don't necessarily, but just this is clearly the ending. And sometimes there's that, because you've got momentum as a writer, sometimes there's a tendency to maybe over-explain the ending, you know, to kind of, you know, go back and do a post-mortem on exactly how they managed to get the plans for that Death Star and all that.
Right. So don't do that.
Maybe for me, yeah, well, maybe for me, that was the way that the Harry Potter thing came across, as it dribbled the ending too much. I'd already had this enormous rush, and I didn't need that much of a soft landing, perhaps, is what I'm saying. But I agree with what you're saying thematically. It fit. There's no question about that. It fits.
Right. It does fit. And it also jumped ahead over the years of grief and rebuilding. So that's another reason to do it the way she did it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. But then maybe she would have created a dribble ending, as you say, if she had tried to say, okay, now Hogwarts has to be rebuilt. It's going to take this long. This many people died. The family's really sad. Harry and Ginny are hooking up, you know, whatever.
What you're saying is, Robert,
yes.
listen to Joe Rowling. If you had written the ending of Harry Potter, it would not have been a blockbuster. It would have been a dribble. So shut up and sit back in your seat.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. Not at all. I would never say that to anyone, especially you.
You're too kind.
On that note, I think we shall stick our landing here and have a decisive end. We know when to end, and it is now. So thank you so much for listening to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Find all of our episodes and show notes, awesome show notes, written by our very own Kathryn Arnold. Oh, wait, am I dribbling? Oops. All right, storyworkspodcast.com.